this is really a rather memorable occasion. This is the first Congress where we can go straight down the line and say, this is how it is done. These are the important facts. These parts of Scientology cannot be done without.
And these other parts we can sure forget about.
At this Congress, we can bury all of my crimes. Without even a headstone. For 8 years now, we've been struggling along, trying to make the grade, trying to keep the show on the road, and trying to alter this thing called civilization. Civilization, that collection of gadgets which makes everybody helpless. And we have made an enormous amount of progress. And that progress is due as much to you as to me. So thank you. 8 years ago, it was a pretty thin look. A terrible fact arose and smacked us in the face. Yes, I had been able to handle some human beings in such a way as to produce a new state of being. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known about this state of being if I hadn't done it. But then I started to explain how it was done. The people I explained it to were not stupid. That had nothing to do with it. It's just that the language and selection of importances had not yet been brought to bear to communicate the subject adequately. We had in Book 1 simply no more, no less than a rather adequate description of the reactive mind. The mental image picture, the engram, the secondary, and so forth. We had ways to run these things, but those ways were not the ways used clearly. Now that's very interesting that I could be guilty of an oversight of that degree. And only having accomplished the fact, again, and communicated it successfully, can I bring up this much guilt. I have a guilt complex, of course. And here we have a state of affairs where all of these materials can be communicated, where the elements are found to be rather simple, where the general state of affairs in telling somebody how to do it is rather easy, and in addition to that, we have ways and means of changing a person's viewpoint sufficiently so that he can clear somebody. And that takes some doing. That's rather interesting, because there are some people who start out to set somebody free is what they think. They think, well, I'll set this fellow free, and then halfway through the intensity they say, well, I don't know. I'm not so sure. Should I set him free or shouldn't I? Well, in view of the fact that I'm dead in my head yet, he might go buzzing around. Well, he might take over my wife, my body. Gee whiz, he might even get down to assuming my Social Security card, and that would be terrible. And therefore, I don't know. And at that moment, you get the introduction of a few minor, innocent flubs. Little flubs, don't amount to much. Knock an ashtray off the desk. Inadvertently running help, you know. Now tell me some way you couldn't possibly help anybody. guy thinks there's such a thing as a criminal mind. That's always a big joke to me. There's a criminal mind and there's a non-criminal mind. I never could figure this out because they've never shown me any non-criminal minds. Oh, it's a terrible thing to say, very uncharitable, but it's simply it's simply a comment on J. Edgar. J. Edgar's an awfully good guy. He's doing that awfully good. Now, where we have human beings, we have human beings. Now, that profound statement needs a little amplification. What do you mean by human being? Well, where everybody is so equal, and where everybody has the idea that everybody is so crazy, we get a human being. But let's look this over. Let's look this over carefully. Let's see a society which is dedicated to the proposition that all men are equal. Jefferson didn't say that. He said all men are created equal under law, or with equal rights under law. He didn't say all men were equal. If you'd gone up to Tom and said, Tom, well, what's this I hear about you being equal? He'd say, to whom? But this proposition of super equality gets into the wheels when we get a super agreement going, an obsessive agreement. We all have to agree with some hidden mores that we know not what of. And if we don't know what this hidden standard is that we're in agreement with, then the only thing we can do is go into agreement with all of the things we think exist. And if we think some of these things exist, whether they do or not, we still agree with them, and we get the lowest order philosophic concept, which is everything is equal to everybody, and you get the science of physics and modern civilization. Now, where do we get the idea that anybody would be better off if he was changed? If we see everybody in a state of disability and super agreement with criminality and in a beautiful state of in turbulence, where we have a society that teaches people if you were a genius, you were crazy. How do you make a genius? Well, you drive somebody crazy, obviously. That's what it adds up to, doesn't it? We get this sort of a situation where everybody's idea of everybody else becomes himself. So let's look at that. See, here's Mr. A, famous Mr. A, very famous fellow, almost famous as Pat Penny. Mr. A is certain that everybody around him is very evil, and that they are going to get him one way or the other. Now, Mr. A has no choice if he is also saddled with super agreement, obsessive agreement, making equality a necessity, but to be this way himself. Now we ask this question, does this evil character actually exist? That's one of the first things we have to ask in clearing. Does this evil character exist? It seems like we have a synthetic personality in existence, which isn't really anybody, but is simply everybody's idea of how bad the other fellow is. This is pretty complicated, see? He's got the idea that this other fellow is so bad that he cannot help but criticize him violently, but because he is equal to this fellow over here, then of course he himself has to assume these characteristics of superlative evil. You see that? We get generals, admirals, politicians, all sorts of people who have an idea that the enemy is so bad, or that the fellow man is so bad, or something else is so bad, they can't possibly live with it, and have therefore got to cut it to pieces. It's a very tricky thing. This has a vast bearing on clearing. They've got to cut this evil being to pieces. Yes, but at the same time, they have an equality complex. By communicating with him, They therefore go into agreement with these evil characteristics, and the only thing they have left is an evil synthetic personality, which they themselves have to wear to be like everybody else and to be normal.